Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the middle of nowhere for a collection of terrifying stories. Also, I want to shout out tonight's artist in the spotlight, J. Luce. I thought this piece really captures where we're going to tonight. Remember, if you have any artwork that you're making and want to share it with the channel, you can do so with the email in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Grab onto your sleeping bags and let the darkness take control. I was driving from Tucson to Denver in the middle of the night. Got tired and was pulling off and crawl in a sleeping bag in the desert, far away from the tooling blacktop. I was on Highway 666. It's since been renamed because everyone was sealing their signs. Anyway, I pull off the road onto a dirt road, and then a little further. I kind of hid the truck behind some vegetation and tossed down a sleeping bar and pad in the middle of the pitch black, huge New Mexico starry night. There was no one around, no light, nothing at all. Hardly any visibility for miles. I'm completely alone in the pitch darkness. Nothing. And getting wound down, my eyes getting droopy. That's when I hear it. It sounds goofy to say, but it's the same Indian music you hear in old black and white westerns. Native music, voices and drums. I literally think I'm dreaming. And when it starts, I'm petrified because that noise is just appearing out of nothing, and it simply put ice into my veins. I relax a little and unfreeze, and try to be logical about what I'm hearing, which has no physical manifestation of its origin. So I'm thinking logically, and instead of pure panic, it could be that I'm at a reservation. Perhaps it's coming behind a previously unseen hill. I get up and look around and don't see anything. It kind of comes and goes in volume. It doesn't seem to be coming from a direction. I'm clueless. I look for evidence and don't find anything. I crawled back into the bag because I'd been driving for hours, and they sang all night. Logic tells me it had to be a group of people I didn't see, but I looked, and there were no ancillary noises like talking or stopping or anything, just that Indian drum, and the hiya that was originally terrifying, and it became calming, and I ended up sleeping fantastically. Later, I learnt that there was a terrible stretch of road for very bad things to happen. It sort of lived up to its 666 moniker for wrecks and bad stuff occurring apparently. I was driving across the country with my friend. At this junction, we're at North Dakota. It had been a long day with lots of driving. At this point it was 1 a.m. and I had awoken from my nap, my back killing me. Hey man, let's call it a night. My back's killing me. Let's go grab a hotel. Alright, we'll get off at the next exit. We're driving. There's nothing around. Just nothingness. Eventually we grab the next exit, and after a little drive we spot a hotel. There's some road construction going on around it, and some of the roads were closed. We tried driving up to it, but every intuitive path is fenced off. Now the hotel was more or less right in front of us, so we drive there, and it's kind of a dirt gravel road that went into a thicket of trees. About 500 yards down this road, there is a bright light. This road is the complete opposite direction of the hotel and the main road. Remembering there's nothing around but this one hotel and infinite fields and trees, it's also like 1:30 a.m. and completely dark. We keep driving around, unable to get the hotel, when my friend just drives towards the light on the dirt road, which is barely wider than the car. I instantly get a bad feeling. This makes no sense. Why is there a light at the end of this dark, dirt road? Dude, what are you doing? This is like bugs flying to a light. Turn around. I will once I find a spot. I don't exactly have the space. Okay, that makes sense. The road was narrow and kind of dropped off on each side. Anyway, he kept driving closer to the light, which I thought may have been a generator light for construction. As we get closer, it's a huge flatbed truck with its high beams on. As we realize this, we are also blinded by the brightness. I thought these people have us exactly where they want us. I'm shielding my eyes and my buddy is slowly driving to pass the behemoth of a truck when the blinding light of the high beams is interrupted by someone walking in front of them and then our car. My friend hits the brake. The figure walks up, and my friend rolls down the window a little. It's a well-dressed guy. My friend goes, "Oh hey, we're just trying to get to the hotel over there, but there's all that construction." "Oh yeah, the hotel's the greatest, just follow us and we'll get you there." "Great, thanks." The interaction was pleasant enough. My friend rolls up the window and drives past the truck. As he's driving past with the window not all the way up, the guy outside calls another guy. "Get in the truck." I see some guy from the shadows toss a cig and walk up to the passenger side. We have to get out of here now. I know, man, I'm working on it. At this point, we're doing a 15-point turn in the dark on a road in the middle of nowhere. We get turned around and the truck is driving slowly and in the middle of nowhere, intentionally taking up the whole path. I'm bumbling on about how this makes no sense and we need to escape, when all of a sudden the truck slams on its brakes and both guys simultaneously jump out and start running towards us. The guy on my side has a shotgun. My friend didn't miss a beat and just floored it, and we went flying off the little drop-off to the side of the road. We sped all the way back to the road, got back on the highway, and made sure we weren't followed and went to the next town. Sleep was not good that night. I was mountain biking deep in the desert in New Mexico. Terrain was high desert mountain foothills. Think juniper, sand, rocks, grasses, cacti, and lots of hills. That's when we noticed something shiny and flashing periodically, glinting in the sun, at the top of a hill. We decided to stash my bike at the side of the trail and hike up this hill to check it out. When I get to the top, I find a shiny, mylar-looking weather balloon slung over a juniper branch and dangling about a foot off the ground. A massive rattlesnake is lying below the mylar balloon, hissing and lunging and biting at it periodically, causing it to swing around. The thrashing motion of the mylar was catching the sun and causing the glinting that I originally saw. I noped the hell out of there and started traversing back down the hill. On my way down, I noticed what looked like a grey gravel platform built into the side of the hill, just a few 100 meters across from where I was coming down. I traverse over to check it out. Mind you, there are no roads or man-made trails or steps or any other indication that any human or machine has access to this man-made looking platform. As I approach this pile of gravel with a flat top built into the side of this hill, I see a warning sign with more warnings on it than I have ever seen on one sign before. The warning signs included poisonous gases, nuclear hazard, trespassing, toxic substances, landslides, pooling water, and open shaft. Being a dumb teenager, I'm intrigued and decide to check it out. I scramble up to the flat portion of the platform and see an open hole in the ground leading straight down further than the eye can see. This opening is squarish, about 5 feet wide, 5 feet long, with rounded corners and seemingly infinitely deep. Being the oaring explorer/scientist I was at 15, I decided the best way to see how deep it was to pick up a large rock and throw it in the hole. So I pick up a rock and drop it in. Nothing. Probably not that deep, and the rock just landed in some soft sand a few feet down without making a noise. To be sure, I grab another large rock, and this time instead of dropping it, I chuck it straight down as hard as I can. I wait a few more seconds, and finally hear a very satisfying thud. Okay, it's really deep. I'm getting out of there. Then, I start walking down. I hear a second massive thunk. Oh, that first thud must have been the first rock, and I'm only hearing the second one now? This thing must be crazy deep, like a mile at least. I sprint down to my bike, jump on it and bike away as quick as I can. Funny thing is, I went over there a year or so later and couldn't find that shaft again. I think it must have been really well concealed from the trail, because I was looking for it, and I knew where to look, but still never found it. I lived out on the high desert for most of my life. 6,000 above sea level, if you're wondering. I was riding my horse alone in the absolute middle of the BFE in the Badlands, with no trees and hardly any brush to speak of. So, sound carries a long way, and there's nowhere to hide for long. When all of a sudden his ears perk up, I feel my skin start to crawl like I'm being watched. My normally mellow gelding starts to panic, and I start to feel really dizzy and my horse stumbles, and I black out. I come to an hour or so later about 3 miles away from the inciting incident, still on my horse. He is frothing with sweat and shaking all over. I'm still unsure what happened. I had plenty of water and snacks. It was 65 degrees and breezy. I don't believe weather or dehydration/hunger were a factor. I have never before or after had a fainting spell, and that was the most reliable, quiet horse I ever owned. I now have a serious case of heebie-jeebies, just thinking about it. My friends and I were high in the woods deep in the Sierra Nevadas, in the California backcountry, and decided to travel a few miles off a path to reach a river and shoot at targets with our .22. The path was littered with deer bones and claw marks from bears, so we're freaking out a bit, but finally make it to where we set up camp. I notice off in the distance, about half a mile upstream, the river, and there are 2 guys walking towards us in the exact direction we are firing our gun. I yell at the guys for them to stop shooting, and we just watch these men wide-eyed in their late 20s and early 30s, walking quickly along the river, when suddenly they both decide to jump in. I should say at this point the river is moving very quickly and could easily sweep you under, and is definitely not safe for a casual swim. We watch as both the men are swept away towards us downstream. One of my friends, Mike, decides to brave it out and get close to the edge and extend a piece of wood for them to grab onto as they're about to pass. Both of the men latch on, and Mike is a hero pulling them to shore. Everyone watches them catch their breath, and we ask the men what they're doing out here, as it's super remote and at least 3 to 4 miles from the nearest trail, and why they both jumped in clearly deadly water. They give us short answers like, "Oh, we're just boys having fun. Just free swimming in the river, you know," while they're leering at us. Immediately the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and every fiber in my body tells me that they meant us harm. We tell them we're going to head back to the trail, and they say that they'd come with us. Given that we're so far away from civilization and these guys are clearly high on something and dangerous to themselves, we reluctantly agree and allow them to follow us. It was the most quiet hike of my life. I felt them trying to feel out if they could take us in a fight. There were 3 of us and 2 of them. We had a .22 but were young, squirrely adults. I don't know how to explain it, but the hike was us constantly positioning against each other, with body language without ever directly fighting. They would get close to the gun and try to both be near it, and then we would counter by getting between them and the gun as naturally as possible, while hiking up a path that was littered in bear claw marks and dung. We finally made it to the car and they decided we weren't suitable targets and moved on. No idea what 2 random guys were doing risking their lives in freezing cold, raging rivers in the Sierra Nevadas, or why they felt they needed to size us up if they could attack 3 random teens, but I'm glad at the end of it, nothing came of it. My mum and her friend were out and about late at night, heading to a party, but their car broke down, and being a rural town with a small population, they had to walk about a mile to the nearest house for help. They got to the front door, and of all the people to answer the door, it was one of their high school teachers. He was horrified to see them out late at night alone. He let them use his phone but scolded them, saying it wasn't safe. The location, time, and circumstances. He let them know they were absolute fools and heeded a somewhat vague warning. My mum called my grandfather to come bring gas and or possibly tow their vehicle. When the girls got back to their car, there was a severed cow head on the hood. Blood everywhere. This was near Hermiston, Oregon, apparently well known for devil worshippers. When I was 20, I used to work as a pizza delivery guy in a small city in northern Germany. On my way home, I had to drive a few miles on a remote state road that led through forests and farmland. One night at around 1 a.m., there was a huge thunderstorm, so I had to drive slowly and carefully. When I arrived at the junction, I noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. It looked like a tall and slender man in a long black leather cloak with a hood. At first, I thought it was someone who had an accident and was looking for help, but when my headlights hit the figure, I noticed that the cloak, especially the hood, appeared to be empty. My headlights did not illuminate the cloak like they should have. It was just the lighting reflecting on the smooth, wet surface that allowed me to see the shape. Of course, I floored the gas pedal and went as fast as I could. A few miles later, I ran into the same, or at least a very similar figure again, standing in the middle of the road, unmoving. This time I didn't even slow down and rush past it. It nearly scared me to death. A few weeks later, this time without a thunderstorm, but a beautiful warm summer's night, I encountered another creature right where I saw the black figure previous. It looked like a giant deer, but without fur and pale grey/white skin. It was extremely skinny, nearly skeletal, and had an abnormally long and thin tail. It ran alongside the road and kept pace with me quite easily as I drove by it. Only when I slammed on the gas pedal and went suicidally fast did it start to fall behind and eventually disappeared into a crop field. The very next day I quit my job and have never used that road again at night. It was 2001. My friend and I, 17 both female, are driving back from a late movie to my house one night. I lived in a pretty rural area in Maine, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. As we were driving down the highway through the woods, we passed a median with a car sitting in it facing in the oncoming direction, with all its lights off. Right after we drove past it, it flashed its lights, did a 3-point turn, and started driving behind us. We giggled that, oh, it must be a gang initiation and we're gonna get murdered, because this was Maine, and that was obviously not gonna happen. The turnoff on my road was a few miles away, and this car stayed behind us the whole time. We made the left turn and the car kept going down the highway, but 30 seconds later we realized the car must have been backed up on the highway and made the turn after us. Now we were getting a little worried. There was still one more road to turn down before we got to my house, as this was way in the woods, and the car did the same thing, backed up and made the left after us. Now we were legit freaked. I had a long driveway and the car followed us right up to the driveway and almost up to my house, which had all the lights on because my mum was home. We ran into the house just in time to see the mystery car reverse back down the driveway and drive away. To this day, we still have no idea why that car was following us, if they thought we were someone else, or if they actually had bad intentions and only changed their mind when they saw that my house lights were on, since we only ever saw the front of the car and never caught a license plate, or a better description than just the blue car. Last October, I was in California for 11 days after my brother's wedding in San Diego. I just wanted to drive around the state and visit California places that had captured my imagination over the years, and I love driving almost as much as I love cars. Some destinations, the Pacific Coast Highway, San Francisco, Bodega Bay, where part of Hitchcock's The Birds was filmed. This movie scared the hell out of my now deceased mother. I also wanted to visit Clipper Mills, where the longest audio of Bigfoot was captured one night in 2012. I don't necessarily believe in Sasquatch, but would never discount someone else's experience, especially if I wasn't there, so off I went. Clipper Mills is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, about 70 miles northeast of Sacramento, very near the dam that was in danger of falling last year, and quite remote. After Bodega Bay, I head across the state for my destination, arriving near Sacramento in time for a late dinner. So it's after dark when I set out on the final leg. Very dark. It takes me a good while on all the twisty turning roads to find my way there. I wanted to get to this exact spot the person who posted the video parked that night. He never specified where exactly within the video, but I managed to do some digging in the YouTube comments section and related videos, and more or less found the spot he was actually at. Around 11 PM, I pulled my rented Camry well off the dark two-lane road to avoid any issues with the very sparse traffic. I saw none whatsoever, as I sat in the darkened interior, listening and allowing my eyes to adapt to the dark for about 20 minutes. I heard nothing but assorted insects, and I sat there, saw nothing moving at all. Eventually, not wanting to activate my car's interior lighting, I crawled out the driver's side window into the black night. I army crawled with my cell phone, with no service, and my handheld GPS to find my way back should I get lost in the dark, and the red flashlight I use with my telescope. I stand there, right by the car window for a solid 2 minutes before I screw up the courage to move away from the Camry. Eventually I walk up the road, still not hearing anything but bugs. Suddenly, without conscious decision to do so, I veer right and head up into the woods. My feet are crunching pine needles now, and to my mind I sound like Bigfoot stomping around myself. After what was about 20 minutes, I stopped to listen, and added to the insects I hear this faint screeching sound far off in the blackness that doesn't sound like an insect at all. It has more consciousness. Now, the thorough darkness adapted my mind, and I hear whispering. It sounds like a person in distress or perhaps a large primate. I remain still. I hear something small scurrying around in the underbrush, followed, a minute later, by that same forlorn sound, now closer. It's time to return to the car. As I'm walking back to the car, I hear this spooky sound every 20 to 30 seconds, and now it's coming from behind me and in front of me. It seems to have a vocabulary of some sort. Different vocalizations, some guttural, some high-pitched, and everywhere in between. My mind is having fun just messing with me now. I was never so happy to see a Camry in all my life. I started it up before my arse was in the seat, and I think I half expected to see scores of red eyes glowering at me in the headlights from the dark forest. But I didn't. Now spooked and my mind telling me some homicidal axe-wielding lunatic was nipping out of my heels, I went back the way I came at a much quicker pace, of the road, and in the woods on the other. I barely missed crushing it. It scared the hell out of me right there. I slowed down a bit, the thought of nearly mowing down an innocent mutt overcoming my mind. The same hour down the road towards Sacramento, when I noticed I had cell service again, I opened my Expedia app and found a hotel nearby for the night. Once safely ensconced in said hotel room, I began scouring the internet on my iPad and came to the conclusion that what I heard was a barred owl or western screech owl, but I could never be 100% sure. It was very creepy though, and I'm done with wandering alone in the woods at night, I think. In 2014, I was driving at night on Highway 81 in Oklahoma. It was around 2 a.m. and I hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes. It was on a stretch of road between Chickasha and Rush Springs. In other words, the middle of nowhere. I come over a small rise and see a car upside down in the ditch, and a body just laying out of the car. Kind of looked like he was sleeping on his side. I slam on the brakes, get out of the car and run over to the guy. I touch his shoulder, and he kind of slumped over on his back. It was then I could see his head was smashed flat on the left side and his abdomen was open. I could smell whiskey coming out of his gut. It was horrifying. This man had no pulse. So I get my phone out and call 911. I give them an estimate of where I am, and they tell me the nearest help is 25 minutes away, and that I needed to wait with the wreck until they arrive. Hell no. I hang up the phone and look around. I am alone, in Oklahoma, in the middle of nowhere. My only companion a dead man. Not knowing what to really do, I took his hand and said the Lord's Prayer, then covered his face with a shirt just hanging out of the car. I was seriously shaking a bit. It was then I heard coyotes turning up. If you haven't heard this sound, it's akin to small children being badly hurt. They wail and screech in what I think is a big circle around me, and this man. It's been 15 minutes and no cars have shown up. I hear them on the highway. They are crossing out, just out of the headlights of my car. Now I have a decision. Do I get in my car and let them come up and tear this guy to pieces, or do I find something to swing and protect his body? I chose the latter. I got the tire iron out of my trunk and got out over to where he's laying. I guess I'm making a stand. I wait another 5 or so minutes and hear them running around in the dark. I realize I'm not truly in control of the situation, and something very primal comes over my brain. It's akin to rage along with a heavy dose of fear. Whatever was going to happen, I was going to fight like a crazed ape in the savannah. At that moment, I see car lights. Finally, a car shows up, and wouldn't you know it, it's a Pontiac Grand AM, full of methed up country boys. They pull over and look at me, and see the dead man, then the car. I say, "Guys, that guy is dead, and there are coyotes circling me." They go into their car, pull out several handguns and a few flashlights. They are wired as hell and excited to kill these coyotes, although they are almost as unnerved as the wild animals out in the dark. A few minutes pass and we hear a siren off in the distance. The guys say, "It's the cops!" They jump in their car and haul ass. I'm alone again. Me and this poor man. 60 seconds later, a state trooper shows up, and then 2 deputy sheriffs and finally 3 city cops from some small town called Ninica, and finally an ambulance. They look at the guy and pronounce him dead, and ask me at least 100 questions, finally asking if they could search my car for drugs. I'm sober for the last 7 years. They search, find nothing, and say thank you for staying with the wreck and that I can leave. I left and start driving down this pitch-dark road yet again. I feel like I've been in a battle for my life, and thinking our civilized behavior is little more than a thin veneer over a wild animal that wants to survive. Last year I went deer hunting. I usually jump hunt, walk through the bush by myself, with a 30-30 lever action. Gone out this late and I had managed to get out into the back fields. The sun was just cresting the horizons, and at this time I usually head in, because you're not supposed to shoot an hour until dark. Well, this night I figured I'd go through the cedar groves at the back of the property, just to see if there were tracks. The property had been in my family for my whole life, and I know it like the back of my hand. Well, right as the dark crests, The coy wolves, which are about 60 to 80 ballsy guys, show up. Now I always enjoy their howling till tonight. That night, they came up behind me and I could hear 4 howl less than 50 yards away. All I had was 4 rounds in my gun and a cell phone flashlight. I start walking as quickly as I could to get through the cedars, a 45-minute ordeal, where another 4 wolves had cut me off. I never fired my gun, but they blind charged me a few times and would start going in a circle pattern, running circles around me. I'd hear them start to do the same noise as a dog on a deer hunt. Twice they brushed me and got so close. By the time I got out of the cedars, I was happy to have at least a shot, but I had an open field to cross and could hear them out on the outskirts the whole time. Also, just thinking about that with only 5 yards of sight of the cell phone light, it took me an hour to stop shaking when I got in. Driving out later that night, I could see they were following me up the driveway, and there was 21 or so tracks. On another occasion, I was staying in an old cabin and had an interaction with Nana Bush. I was just finishing up for the night and this bird starts slamming into my window for a solid 5 minutes. It's 11 p.m. in the middle of February, and it's odd to see a bird, let alone one doing this. I don't think anything of it, and carry on till I'm ready to go to bed. Going for my bedtime smoke, I see the bird clinging to the screen door. Pushing on out, it flies at me twice and hits all the windows on that side of the house, and vanishes. And I hear something scuttle towards me, and I see a figure 3 feet tall running on 2 legs in the dark between the vehicles. I just booed out of the situation and locked the doors and went to bed. When I was younger, my family was extremely poor and lived in a very old mobile home on some land my grandpa owned. This piece of land was in a very small town out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, covered in wood. The town itself was your typical small country town where football was king and there was nothing to do but get drunk or high on the weekend. It was also the typical type of town, along with it being the early 90s, where one didn't typically have to worry much about locking their doors or setting an alarm. Now our trailer was a 2-bedroom, and my parents, always putting us kids ahead of themselves, slept in the living room on a fold-out couch. My room was directly connected to it, and my sister's room was down a hallway past the kitchen and bathroom at the other end of the trailer. One night after everyone had gone to bed, my dad is woken up by a feeling that there is someone in the room. He looks around a bit and sees a large male figure sitting in the easy chair just feet from the bed. My dad quickly flipped on the light next to his bed and saw it was a neighbor from down the road named Carter. Carter was known for being a frequent drug user and was often in trouble with the law because of this. My dad asked him why the hell he was there and what he was doing, and asked him to get out. "I can't," Carter replied. "The demons are chasing me. Your house is the only safe one." My dad, who I should say is fairly large and a terrifying person, responded that if he didn't get out now, the house would be a lot less safe for him. "If they leave, they'll get me. They've been chasing me all night, and if they catch me, I'm dead." My dad's response was that there was no demons, but that if he didn't get out of his house now, he would be dead. From what I've since been told, I was asleep for this part. My mum also hurled a few threats. While she may not be big, she was equally as terrifying. I believe it was her anger that finally scared him off. My dad got up and locked the doors and watched through the blinds as Carter decided, since he couldn't outrun the demons, he'd steal our old, beat-a Suburban that my dad always left the keys in. He drove around for an hour, and we called the police, and it took us about that long to get us out since the closest police station was about 20 or so minutes away. He finally brought it back and was arrested and taken to jail. He was deemed crazy and ended up being locked in a mental institution. The scarier part is that for years after this, we'd get phone calls where we'd all hear this music that would have lyrics like, "I'm gonna kill you." These calls lasted for years and followed us from house to house, even though we always had different numbers and would even be in different states. We always thought it was him sending us a message. The call stopped when I was 12. I later found out that it was around the time that Carter thought the best thing to do for himself would to soak himself in gasoline and set himself on fire. When I was a teenager, my friends and I liked to go exploring uninhabited islands. They're called the Thousand Islands in the Indian River Lagoon. We camped, played paintball, all pretty innocent stuff. One day we decided to explore a new island for a fresh spot. We found a big one, so to save time, I was inserted on the southern end to explore while the others canoed around the island to see what was there. The plan was for me to meet them on the north side. That did not happen. The island was hell. Brambles. Bush so thick I had to crawl through the muck. The perimeter was a swamp with dead trees and God knows what lurking under the film of green algae. And then there were the skeletons. As I crawled my way up the island, I came upon skeleton after skeleton. Turtles, raccoons, deer. That's when it hit me. This is an alligator heaven. I freaked out and made a break for the open water, not wanting to die. I yelled out as loud as I could, and fortunately my friends heard me and paddled ferociously out to me. I had made it only 1/3 of the way up the island, and was thankfully extracted. We named that one Hell Island, and never returned. Looking back on it, I think we got very lucky. We camped/canoed in places alligators bred, and got bitten to hell during the West Nile outbreak. It was fun though. I live in rural Western Canada, and have been hiking in the swamps all my life. I almost never run into people, but all kinds will drive out here to dump their trash. Lots of poachers too. I almost never find trash deep in the woods. It's mostly near roads. I've gone on many night walks as well, but saw nothing odd on those. When I was a child, my brother and I found a skinned bear with no head dumped in the ditch. We live out in the boonies, so I suppose the poachers thought it was an okay place to dump it. It certainly gave us a real fright. We thought it was a human at first. The skinned bear hands look pretty human, especially if you don't know any better. I've seen a dead boar inside of a dumped freezer. This one was really wild to me, because I've never seen a boar in my life. We don't get them wild up here, so it must have been from a farm, too lazy to dispose of it properly. It had hair and tusks. I've also seen ribs inside of a dumped washing machine, too small to be human. I once found a trash bag beside a tree that had a cross etched into it, and there was a cat in it. I suppose they couldn't be bothered to give their cat a burial, but the cross was a nice touch. Aside from that, I've seen bear and moose, and I hear about people saying if you smell garbage in the woods, it's a Sasquatch. If you smell death and trash, I bet money that it's a grizzly, and you should go home, because they can smell you roughly 30 kilometers away against the wind. If you can smell them, they already know you were there a long time ago. Be safe, and always carry bear mace and tell someone where you're going. Have a compass, and make some noise when you're out. While cougars are dangerous, they are rare and spook easily. A bear or moose is much more likely to cause you harm. Coyotes are almost always harmless unless they've been breeding with wolves. I think there's only one confirmed death from coyotes in Canada. Coy wolves that were guarding food. If you don't know anything about bears and are planning to go hiking where they are prevalent, please look up bear safety and never feed the bears. They might just take you as their next meal as well. When I was young and adventurous, my boyfriend and I would go four-wheeling deep in the mountains and set up dry camps. There were rough trails for driving, but we were truly remote, and no cell coverage or other means of communication were available. We're in the tent sleeping until we hear a vehicle. We think they'll drive past, but they stop and sit there with their engine on and lights off. We look outside. It's a dark van, no side windows, and looks sketchy as hell. We stay in the tent watching to see if anyone's going to get out and try something. We were armed because, America. So I got to sit there for 20 minutes waiting for this van full of idiots or criminals to decide whether they're going to keep driving or not. They finally left, and so did we, as soon as we got packed up. Took us 4 hours of driving through the mountains in the dark to get back on the highway and grab a hotel room. That was the last time I ever went out alone like that. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's scary stories. It's always fun to return to the middle of nowhere for some fresh horrors. If you did enjoy tonight's episode, feel free to let me know down below. And as always, a huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing. Thank you. It really is invaluable support. Well, I hope everyone's doing good. Nothing that interesting to report. Thank you everyone for the lovely well wishes about, my daughter being born. We're quite excited. She's going to be born around mid-August. So I'm going to, I think, starting not next week, the week after, I'm probably going to try and do my uploads in advance, just so that when she's born, I don't have the stress and pressure of having to pump out content, especially because I don't want to miss an upload. So just have everything ready for her birth and have a bit of, daddy-daughter time. So yes, going to be the father of 2, but I'm going to stop there. I think 2 is plenty. And we're very excited, of course, to meet the baby. But that aside, thank you everyone for sticking around. Tomorrow we've got a lovely big mega compilation in the rain. That's going to be fun. So be sure to stick around for that. Don't forget we've got content on the podcast. There's the shorts here on YouTube as well that you can check out for mini horror. And I'll be back on Monday with a fresh topic for your listening pleasure. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.